I'm Doug Holdreed. This PowerPoint is designed to accompany Exploring Art, a Global Thematic Approach, Chapter 3. In this chapter, we'll look at some of the vocabulary and some of the concepts that are particularly important in the study of architecture. In this chapter, we'll look at some of the traditional building methods, the basic structural systems that we can see in buildings throughout history. One of the oldest approaches to construction is what we call load-bearing construction, where the walls bear the weight of the building. Post and lintel is another traditional method, and we'll look at some of the ways of erecting buildings that date back to the ancient Greeks with their columns and colonnades. We'll also look at some more recent methods of construction, including wood frame construction and the way in which arches and vaults and domes came into the picture during the Renaissance period. And finally, we'll look at more recent methods of construction, such as steel frame construction, reinforced concrete, and the use of trusses. During prehistoric times, we don't really have what we would think of as architecture or permanent buildings, but there is evidence of Paleolithic hunters constructing shelters from materials that they had available to them. In this slide you can see a shelter that's constructed out of mastodon bones. Here's a good example of post and lintel construction. This is from a temple to the god Horus in ancient Egypt. Here again we see the vertical posts or columns topped by horizontal lintels. The ancient Greeks also used post and lintel construction. They developed three distinct styles or orders for their architecture: the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. When the Romans came along, they built upon this and added a couple of styles or composite orders of their own. One of the most famous pieces of Greek architecture is the Parthenon. This was a temple to the patroness, the goddess Athena, who watched over the city of Athens. Here again you see the supporting posts topped by horizontal lintels. Another system of construction is wood frame construction. This is an example of that from ancient China, from the Forbidden City. Here we can see how a more elaborate and complex system of wood supports is used to supply the basic structure of the building, and this is then sheathed or covered with an enclosure. Sometimes this is compared to a skeleton skin form of construction. The other thing that we see in this example are overhangs or eaves that project out beyond the side walls, and we also see a high degree of ornamentation in this example. An important contribution to the history of architecture came along when the Greeks began to use the arch. This made it possible to do all sorts of things architecturally that had never been done before. Here in this chart we see examples of colonnades, groin vaults, domes, and the flying buttresses, which became an important feature of Gothic cathedrals. The Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles in France is a good example of a barrel vault. If you look closely, you can see that this long hall is really a continuous progression of arches that form the ceiling. One of the best examples of Gothic architecture is Chartres Cathedral in France. This beautiful building incorporates many of the uses of arches and vaults in the groin vaults of the ceiling and the flying buttresses, which help to support the exterior walls. More modern methods of construction include steel frame construction, where instead of using wood in a skeleton skin approach, steel is used instead. Another modern technique is reinforced concrete. Trusses and geodesic dome construction are also a form of modern architectural development. The Carson Perry Scott building is, or was, one of the first examples of a modern skyscraper. The availability of steel and steel frame construction made it possible in the early 1900s to start going up with buildings instead of spreading out and using up more and more real estate. This building, which is actually a home called Falling Water, was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright. It's a good example of how an architect considers the physical environment when designing a building. The geography in the area where Wright designed this home is full of cliffs and stratified rock, and Frank Lloyd Wright tried to be sensitive to that in his design. In this building, the stream that we see flows right through the house, right through the living room, and then cascades back into the natural stream bed as we see in the picture. Here's an example of reinforced concrete. This is the Opera House in Sydney, Australia. With reinforced concrete, architects are able to sort of break the bounds of the limitations of manufactured construction materials, and they're able to create more free-form, more exciting architectural designs. This is the Bank of China building in Hong Kong, designed by I.M. Pai. It really takes advantage of steel construction, and in this case we have a building that's sheathed with a lot of glass. Buckminster Fuller really developed the potential of the geodesic dome for architectural use. This is the U.S. Pavilion in Montreal from the 1967 World Expo. There's a saying in architecture, form follows function. After the form is established, then comes a consideration of ornamentation. What kinds of visual elaborations can be developed to make the design look more interesting and perhaps more finished. Here is some of the detail from the Imperial Throne Room of the Hall of Supreme Harmony in the Forbidden City in Beijing, China. It's a good example of what we mean by ornamentation. Ecological concerns come into play in architectural design as well. This Toba Batak house, which is from Sumatra, Indonesia in the South Pacific, is a good example of that. The walls are designed in such a way that the wide windows catch the available breezes, and the thatched roof is steeply pitched so that when the heavy rains come, it runs right off of the building. The funerary temple of Hatshepsut, one of the queens of ancient Egypt, is a great example of how a work of architecture can be integrated into the natural environment. Moshe Safdie's habitat in Israel grows organically. He wanted to design a complex of dwellings that could grow and evolve along with the needs of their inhabitants.